As we all know, zero trust is quite important, but many people don't understand that zero trust right now is based on identity. I have Leon today that we would like to talk about consumer identity versus corporate identity. Leon, can you tell me a bit about yourself and the difference between the two?
Thanks for having me. Leon Lukiyanets, I'm the managing partner at Synergetika Group, and we are a premier boutique consultancy focusing purely on identity and access management. So lots of our customers are asking this question, what's the difference? And as a matter of fact, I try to not differentiate between IAM and CIM, as it is called, consumer or customer IAM. Different people call it differently. I think consumer IAM is a subset of IAM. So I like to divide the bigger identity access management into two areas based on the population that they manage. And that's enterprise IAM, or it's called EIM, and then CIM. And let's talk about it because it's an interesting topic. Lots of people still confuse these two things. Lots of people think that it's one and the same. The tools, the techniques, the approaches are applicable to both. And that's not quite the case. So first off, enterprise IAM is much older than consumer IAM. It's been there since the age of mainframes, since the age of 8-character passwords, right? So consumer IAM is becoming more important with the advent of digital transformation, digital economy. And even though most of the big corporations, banks, telecoms, government agencies, greater education already have good grip on consumer IAM, there are still many small and medium-sized enterprises and even in larger companies who are still trying it out. And they're questioning whether to use the same tools or not.
So just to interrupt you for a second, just to explain to everyone, let's give some high-level examples. If I'm a bank, I have employees. Employees' identity will be my corporate identity.
Correct.
But as a user or consumer of a bank, it's going to be consumer identity. The
Correct.
Same could be with Amazon. Same could be with a movie,
with
maybe website.
With pretty much any company which works business to consumer model. If you are in a B2C world, if you need to talk to, if your end users are not corporations, not businesses, but the consumers, you probably will come across figuring out how do we deal with consumer IAM. Now, you mentioned a good example, but that example gets a little bit murkier. So yes, if I'm an employee, I clearly fall into IAM of that bank. If I am the bank user, if I have an account at the bank, then I clearly fall into CIM. Where do I fall if I'm both employee and the customer of the bank? That's a much grayer question. Where do we fall with populations that are service providers? If I'm a contractor at the bank, what happens if I'm a third party that is helping doing the services for the bank? So main topic about this is how segregated. So I'll give you a half a dozen or so different metrics and criteria on how to separate whether a particular area falls into CIM or IAM and why they're different, what's different about it. So number one is the sheer size of identities. In enterprise IAM, we manage thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Our few enterprises on the planet manage hundreds of thousands of EIM identities. In CIM world, we manage millions, tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions, and in a few examples, like the worlds of Facebooks and Googles, we manage billions of identities.
So you say liability is bigger?
Based on that alone, just tools are very different. What a regular LDAP can do might require a NoSQL database or data lake in another example. Just the scale and sheer size of it might require different technologies. They're not designed. Yes, you can put 1 million identities into Active Directory. Sure, it'll work. Will probably not work very well for that purpose. It's not designed to manage millions or tens of millions of identities. So the tools are different based on the size alone. Second thing that's important is the identity verification. We assume identity of the employees. We verify that identity. When you show up on your first day at work, you show your driver's license, you probably had your background check run on you. So the employer reasonably well knows who you are and they establish your identity, they issue identity to you. In the world of consumers, identity verification is a much bigger question. Generally, those people and those entities do not have an assumed identity, they come with their own identity. So we have services like SecureKey in Canada and other federation services. Some companies like to use social media identities, log in with Google, log in with Facebook. we cannot verify based on that information the identity. I could be Leon Lukiyanets in Facebook, but in reality, I could be John Doe. That's just the username, first and last name that I chose. So that's the second piece, the origin of identity and the assumption. Third is the stickiness and the policies. If you join the bank, you don't really have much choice about the identity tools you use. You might not like your old Radius physical hardware token, but you're stuck with it if your employer told you. We cannot quite give the same power. We don't have the same power and don't have the same pressure on consumers. If they don't like the identity tools we choose, they leave and they don't become sticky with our business. And that's very important to understand. So I'll take my personal choice. If I need to go on some website and buy a product and it doesn't give me an option to log in with Google or with Apple ID or with some other existing identity that I have, and it forces me to create a new password, I'm probably clicking cancel on that checkout button. I'm going to go somewhere else and buy it wherever. I already have 300 identities on the web that I don't want to manage anymore. So that's some other reasons. A couple other things. So users like to federate their data, and data is federated in multiple places, and they bring all the data to you as the business. So you need to be able to work with multiple providers. Different protocols apply there. So we need to work, because we're working outside of perimeter, we need to work with open web protocols. We need to work with OpenID Connect. We need to work with OAuth. SAML is frowned upon, for example, because it requires metadata exchange. You cannot work with AD, you cannot work with directories in general in that world. So different tools, different technologies, different processes, and different strategies apply, in short.
From security perspective, what's the guidelines? What people need to think about it? I know many companies that start their own company and they know they will do online store or some other things. They will need to save user identities, consumer identities. So they're afraid if something happened to them, they'll be breached.
100%. So number one, I would say try to reinvent the wheel as little as possible. There's lots of IAM tools out there, a wide range of products ranging from completely free to reasonable to very expensive with one wide range of capability. There's lots of good tools to use those tools. Do not invent your own IAM tools. Do not try to figure out how to solve someone else's password. Do not try to figure out how to hash it, because you'll probably make mistakes. These technologies are complex to maintain, so there's no need to invent this. Use known, proven libraries of technologies. As a matter of fact, for authentication, I would argue try to avoid authentication at all, especially if you're a small to medium-sized business. Large enterprises, the banks, the telecoms we discussed, they cannot afford to allow Google or Amazon or Apple to be the source of your identity and authentication, right? But smaller businesses can. I would argue try to avoid the option of creating your own username and password as much as possible. Try to rely on the federation so that let the big giants take care of that. Try to collect only as much data as you need. Users don't like data collection. Users will much likely stick if you start small and you enhance data collection as you need and for the purposes as you need. So I'll always offer guest checkouts, always offer guest ability to do some guest activities before you start collecting all the data. Be mindful, obviously, of the regulations. The world is not geographically, fragmented anymore. Your user could be coming from EU. You might be required to be subject to GDPR and other regulations. So keep all of that in mind. And again, try to stay in the business of whatever you're doing. But if you bank, worry about financial services. If you're selling widgets online, then focus on widgets and use tools that are out there. There's tools like Microsoft B2C, there's Okta out there. There's other tools that are readily available, and they do a great job at maintaining identities for your customers. There are tools that do social login. Those tools are Janray and Gigia and a few other tools that offer really good social logon integration. So that would be what I would suggest to smaller companies is minimize your footprint related to identity, because those projects are complex. That's where you fail. That's where your data gets exposed and exfiltrated.
Leon, thank you very much.
Pleasure being here.
It was great talking to you. I know we just crashed the topic, so we have to probably talk again. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Bye.